Another appropriate, beautiful song for what I want to talk about today. So remember that feeling of waiting to fly. You know, it doesn't matter how old you are. I had to look up a fact today that Grandma Moses started painting at 87, just to remind myself that you can be a young person waiting to fly at any age, right? So I'm bearing that in serious mind today. Now, I want to show a movie. It's just the beginning of a movie about Charles Fillmore. We're going to watch about 4 minutes together. And keep hold of that feeling you got from listening to Chris and the music. This is a little bit of a different tone, but I'm going to come over here, turn the lights off, and Roland's going to show us a few minutes of Charles Fillmore, American Mystic, because I'm going to talk a little bit about
it. I don't want to live here any longer. I don't want to grow old. Well, you don't have to. You grow old because you think old thoughts. I grow old because I haven't gotten rid altogether of my old thoughts. But I'm eliminating them gradually. Just gradually. And more than one of you in the audience, as you look in the mirror, and see that same old mug, you think, well, I wish I could have something new. Well, you can. That's the glory of Christianity.
He was a child of the frontier. Born on a Chippewa reservation in Minnesota, he played among the tents of Indians and mingled with rough, solitary men, the hunters and trappers who bartered their furs with his father. A father who, when Charles was 7, left his wife and sons to live a life of solitude in the wilderness. This strengthened a bond with his mother that would continue throughout his adult life. When he was 10, Charles fell and dislocated his right hip. Years later, he would vividly recall, "I was bled, leeched, cupped, lanced, seasoned, blistered, and roweled. 6 running sores were artificially produced on my leg to draw out the diseased condition that was presumed to be within. Physicians of different schools were employed, and the last always wondered how I ever pulled through alive under the treatment of the quack that had preceded him. Hip socket destroyed and leg withered by tuberculosis. At age 12, he faced the future of an invalid. But to support himself and his mother, he took a job as a printer's devil. He was able to persuade the educated wife of an army officer to tutor him. She introduced him to the classics and Shakespeare, and by the time he left Minnesota at 19, he had assimilated such seemingly divergent views as the transcendentalism of Emerson and the agnostic stance of Robert Ingersoll.
You question my orthodoxy. I'm decidedly eclectic in my theology. Is it not my right to be?
Thus, Myrtle Page.
So that was Myrtle in one of her first letters to him. Just to give you a little beginning of that movie, I'll show it. It'll be shown on World Day of Prayer, and also I'll show a few more clips of eventual Sundays. But I wanted to focus a little bit on the beginnings of New Thought. And based on the idea of, lean on me, like we really need the people who come before us. And I have to admit that I love the thought of pioneers in New Thought in America. New Thought was definitely an American movement. And this is what Horatio Dresser says in his book, Spirit of New Thought. New Thought stands for the practice of the presence of God, reduced to a scientific method of living a selfless life through union with the power that is love in action, a power which can bring sweetness and light and peace to people, rob death of its sting and pain of its poignancy, take the terror out of disease, and crown life with the joy and health and abundance which are the rightful inheritance of every child of God. So, what qualities of spiritual heroism are exemplified by the pioneers? Well, the interesting thing about those first people who were investigating New Thought was they were rebellious, The qualities of heroism, they were unwilling to accept the status quo of whatever religion or belief they were in. Many of the pioneers had an injury, like Charles had a hip injury, and he wanted to heal it. Myrtle had tuberculosis. Quimby, who I'm going to talk about, had tuberculosis. So part of it is they had an unwillingness to accept fate, so to speak, and they had to be totally willing to explore a new idea. They had to be willing to experiment, to try it out, and they had to be willing to stand apart from the mainstream. Henry David Thoreau says, if a man does not keep pace with his companions, perhaps it is because he hears a different drummer. Let him step to the music he hears, however measured or far away. Well, let's go into a little bit of history. My source is a book called Spirits in Rebellion by Charles S. Braden. And we'll do a little bit of history, then I'll tell you some stories about the people that hopefully will engage us. So the first thing is to look at this movement called New Thought, and the word new is, for us, of course, what does new mean? This movement was in the 1800s. So the word new isn't about any startling new idea, because every idea in New Thought was an idea in the Christian religion or another world religion, and a lot of the basic ideas go back to Plato. So the New Thought was new in regards to what was the status quo at the time, certainly in Christianity in America. And Phineas Quimby, known as the founder of the movement, he claimed to have rediscovered Jesus' method of healing. Now, the thing about New Thought was it was many different people. It was a grassroots movement, so different people had different details or different specific things about what they believed in and what they taught. But there were two main emphases. Practical concern about healing humanity's ills, okay? Practical concern. We want to heal something. And an ideology or theology that explains the source of the healing power. Instead of just saying, it's a mystery, I don't know why this happened, they wanted the way the universe works to make sense. And it was in New Thought that the healing of disease by mental means was linked together by Quimby. Right? This was the particular New Thought. In America, in New England, in the first half of the 19th century, there were three diverging outlooks, right? So there was Orthodox Christianity, there were the liberal Unitarians, and there was a small but vocal group of transcendentalists who emphasized intuition is a basic source of the nature of reality, okay? So that means, we get that. We're so used to that, to trust your intuition, that you can contact reality by your intuition. And the nature of humans as divine, okay? This is a radical departure from most Christianity at the time. The nature of humans were divine, and they possess divine qualities. And one last emphasis that Braden calls the fundamental idealistic view of the universe and reality. So he's saying that there's an idealistic view, and I'm saying not like Pollyanna, not like everything's roses, more like idealistic, like there is an ideal. And that, of course, is the thing that goes back to Plato, the ideal. That goes all the way back to him. And I'm going to add in unity, a lot of how we understand it today is the further philosophy of non-dualism. Okay, that's what there's one power and one presence is. That's non-dualism. What we say every Sunday, the beginning. And that's when I talk about happiness, including everything. That's a practical aspect of non-dualism. That and one power, one power in my life. So back to transcendentalism. They were teaching the supremacy of mind over matter. And George Ripley wrote, "Truth of religion does not depend on tradition nor historical facts, but has an unerring witness in the human soul." That's something that probably any Unity Truth student would recognize, that truth is in our soul, it's innate. We're all the time saying Christ is within you, right? That you can find it. It's in you. Now I want to talk a little bit about Phineas P. Quimby. He was born in 1802 in the New England area. In his early 30s, he was afflicted with tuberculosis. So he had a story about a friend who cured himself from tuberculosis by horseback riding. So this is interesting. Now, I'm getting the picture of this Quimby guy as somebody who definitely questions the status quo and wants to know how things work. People like that. One of my son's friends was a little kid who was interested in everything. Do you know people like that who want to know how everything works? They're fascinated by everything, and they really they delve into it. When I went over to pick up Kelly one time from his friend's house, I found Ian in the backyard with a sheet torn up and all around him because the teacher had taught them about the Tuaregs, which is a tribe. And Kelly, that's my son, he was just like, yeah, we learned about the Tuaregs. But Ian had ripped up the sheet and was making himself a costume and was digging something in the backyard, that kind of into everything, that excitement. I'm just definitely sure that Quimby was that kind of guy. So he hears that his friend cured himself of tuberculosis by horseback riding. He felt so weak, he didn't think he could ride a horse. So he gets a horse and a carriage. And he apparently has trouble getting the horse to go. So he ends up leading the horse and the carriage up a hill. He didn't give up, and he ran into a farmer, and the farmer managed to get the horse to go. So he rode up and down the hill a lot that day and somehow had some kind of transformation about his tuberculosis. At least he felt his energy coming back. So that was the first thing that happened. As it turned out, that wasn't a complete cure, but that started him on his way. And to me, it shows that he wasn't going to accept the way things were. And the truth was, there were a lot of practitioners of medical or purveyors of medicine that maybe weren't so, if that was anybody's strange idea, snake oil or electricity. We've seen some of the things in history books about what medical people did, and we're going like, oh my God, bleeding, whatever, leeches, that just, stuff like that. So he thought there should be a better way. And so the first thing Quimby did was he learned about mesmerism. Somebody came by and gave a talk on mesmerism, which is hypnotism. So that's his first delving into the mind. And Quimby was very interested in that, in hypnotism. And so he learned how to hypnotize people. And there's a description of him as a tiny man with dark eyes that just held your focus. Like he was probably one of those guys who he could hypnotize all of you in the audience into, bringing me roses next week or whatever, So he had that steady, that gaze. And he did use hypnotism. And the interesting thing is that he had he found a subject whose name was Lucius Berkmar, who, while Quimby hypnotized him, this subject had extraordinary clairvoyant powers about healing. This is what he thought. It was very interesting because this person, Lucius, when Quimby would put Lucius under, he would bring Lucius around and Lucius would diagnose something. Like, they would look at Brian and say, Brian, you've got a sore elbow and you need to apply some comfrey or something. And Kathy, you've got a headache and here, drink some herbal tea. And the interesting thing is, so Quimby, he's also very excited because he wants things that work, right? He wants to go in there and he wants things that work, and it seems like this works. He kept practicing, and he started noticing. He didn't just accept things. He always wanted to know, why did this work? Why did this work? Why was it that this hypnotism worked? And eventually, he figured out that what he really thought was that Lucius was just psychically reading the people. It wasn't like he was it wasn't like he was diagnosing anything other than he formed a connection to them, and he zeroed in on what they needed to hear somehow, and whatever he described as healing, whatever he prescribed was going to work because the people believed it. So he's watching this and he's thinking, wait a minute, it's not like this guy is all-knowing in magic and knows what's up and can heal, but he's connected, he's able to connect to the people. And so Quimby taught himself to be, the next thing he noticed, which I think is very interesting, is that he noticed that he didn't have to tell he didn't have to tell Lucius something. At a certain point, he could visualize something, and Lucius would get it. So there started to be this one-mind connection that, we know about, but I don't know about you, but I'm not great at it yet. When I think of things, they're not automatically going into your mind, right? So it was Quimby noticing how it worked, and noticing that the hypnotism worked. How does it work? Looking at it, experimenting with it, and then he developed his mind-body connection. So he eventually didn't use hypnotism, and hypnotism can be a very good tool. By the way, I'm not saying self-hypnotism is a good way to use your mind for what you want to use it for. But he eventually just recognized that he gave up using hypnotism, and he just saw the connection so strong about the mental causing of disease, because that's what he was passionate about. He was passionate about healing. He wanted to heal his own self, and he wanted to heal people, and he was very passionate about that mental connection. So that was what he was just all about. He is probably as much as an original thinker as one is likely to find. That's what Mr. Braden says. And this is another thing somebody wrote about him who knew him very well. Although he might have refined his ideas if he had read what others were thinking, he was more interested in the practical application of his new method of healing to the many who sought him out. Okay, this is what I relate to. That I know that I really am interested in the history and the theory, but I am really, I like the rubber meets the road, right? Isn't that what many of us are excited about? I know that when my first sojourn into a Unity church, what was I excited about? The theory? No. I was excited about the feeling and the connection, which was everything to me. The connection of spirit, the connection of oneness. I didn't necessarily have a physical ailment that I was worried about, but I had a lot of emotional baggage, and I was really good at being miserable, so I wanted to heal that. And when I found that, it was like, do you guys remember, have you seen on the internet those videos of kids when they get a dog? And they're like, some of them, like, they can't breathe. They're like, and some of them are like, wah! And some of them are like, just like weeping and crying. It's like, you remember that feeling? Can you remember that feeling of something like that when you were so excited? That's how I felt when not just coming to Unity, but when I got that picture, it's like just the glimmer of it could be different. There's this whole world opening up with the mental first connection, I don't have to accept the status quo, all of that. So here we go. Quimby was not interested in creating a school or religion. Other people took his ideas and went on, certainly notably Mary Baker Eddy, and then a whole group of people went on with the new thought, and obviously Unity came out of that with Charles and Myrtle Fillmore, co-founders of Unity, based on his ideas and other ideas and all the things that were, going around. People were talking and exploring this. But let's relate this to our own life. How can I be a spiritual pioneer? All right? Where do you right now feel frustrated with the status quo, in your own life or around you? How can you be a spiritual pioneer? How can you not say, I am not going to accept the status quo here? I get excited again when I think about that, because I think, hey, there's some stuff I would still like to change. So think about that. Where do you feel frustrated with the status quo? And embrace the qualities of being willing to explore a new idea, being willing to experiment, to try it out, to stand apart from the mainstream. And who knows what's going to happen? Who knows what the Quimby in you is going to bring out, the rebellion in you, the spiritual transformation in you. Who knows? I am excited to hear about it. You can give me a report in a couple of weeks. Let's take an offering for Unity. I invite you to take your tithe and your love offering in your hand, and